Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome back to the Grow Podcast, episode 21.
We've come of age. You knew that one was coming.
Pastor Mike, very excited about
Yes.
the podcast turning 21 episodes old.
That's right.
We will not be partaking in alcoholic beverages during today's podcast, but the podcast is now old enough to do
Podcast
so
is legally old.
in North Dakota. But anyway,
Maybe we should
Thank you.
we should censor that out. Edit that one out.
now I think the main reason people join us for the Grow Podcast is for the couple minutes of nonsense at the beginning.
Oh, really?
Before we jump
I
in.
was thinking
I definitely don't think that at all.
Yeah.
Which is why we'll jump in. Thank you again for joining us today. It's been so great having all of you here for all these Grow podcasts. I know you guys, like myself, have really appreciated the teaching from Pastor Mike, especially in the more conversational style we do here on the Grow podcast. So if you haven't subscribed already, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button, maybe leave us a comment or some feedback, anything like that. And last week, Pastor Mike asked for questions for just like 4 episodes from now to do a Q&A podcast. So keep those questions coming in. You can send, here's the problem. If they send them to pastor.mike, I don't want you seeing them. So I'm going to,
I'll sure
screen
that
your
those
emails.
Intercepted.
Just see the Pastor Michael, check the subject line and forward those to me because I would like to surprise him with some of those questions. But send your questions in. I think it'll be really fun to have some questions for Pastor Mike and, pepper you with theological
they don't have to be theological questions. They could just be questions.
I think like 10 episodes ago, I asked people to just send in questions like, how tall is Pastor Mike? And things like that.
I didn't see any. Did you see any?
But 5'4", actually. He looks really tall on camera. Anyway, moving on.
Wow.
Episode 21. If you've been joining us for our weekends, and if you haven't, I really encourage you to go back and watch the teaching from Pastor Mike the last 2 weeks in our new series, Infinite and Intimate. It's a bit of a tongue twister, and I'm concerned every single time. But so far, I haven't messed it up too bad on camera. But we've been talking about who God is and why it matters. And this week, we're going to talk about if knowing God is important, how do I get to know Him? How do I get to know God?
And this goes, to break even the title of the series apart, last week we talked about the infinite, the otherness of God, incomprehensibility of God, and we kind of went deep on this. This week I want to go a little bit more to the intimate side of, okay, if God is really big, like we talked about, can I really get to know Him? We began to touch on it last week. And one of the things we need to understand right off the top is, before we can understand how to get to know God, is we need to understand why we really want to get to know Him. And so here's kind of an exercise for us right at the beginning. So the homework at the beginning, is that a bad thing? But right now,
I wasn't planning on exercising right now, Pastor Mike.
We're going to exercise your brain.
Oh, okay. I can do that one.
All right. Think about the things that you anticipate. What are the things that you anticipate? Like, anticipate that someday, somehow, this was coming. The Vikings might somehow win the Super Bowl.
I think we've all moved on from that one. But the
what
Twins.
What are the things that you want? Yeah. What are the things that you want? What are the things that you desire? We all have those big things, small things, relationships, marriage. There's physical things, biological things, food, kids, sex, success. The list goes on and on and on. Desires and wants. Well, all of those things, and we miss this, all of those things ultimately are desires that were put into us, but we chase after those things because we believe, and to some extent they do, they're reflections of what our souls are ultimately looking for. It's telling us there's a part of us that is hungry. So think about those things. So think about, say, a relationship, whether it's a dating relationship or marriage relationship. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's mixed up in there. What do we really hope we get out of that? There's relationship that we get out of it. In any relationship, what are the things that we kind of want? We want to know that this person likes us, that they
It's
know
usually
us.
a helpful part of a relationship.
That they know us instead of, they just sort of know stuff about us. To know and to be known, to encourage us, to help us grow. All of those things ultimately are reflections of there's a deeper desire in us. We were designed to be satisfied, our desires to be satisfied by one source alone, and everything else is pointing us towards that. And I know that kind of sounds out there. Those are my sound effects. That's as good as it gets. Can we add sound effects in for that one?
Over the top of...
Yes, please do. But here's the problem, and we've talked about this before, but it's really important. The part of us where all of these desires ultimately have their roots in is eternal. And the only thing that will satisfy something that's eternal is something that's, you can fill in the blank. Eternal. See? You got it. You nailed that one. You can't fill a bottomless pit with something that isn't as big as the bottomless pit.
Sure.
You can't fill something infinite with something finite. And we know this innately. I mean, there's part of this when I was talking about all those desires. Part of us, we want to argue with this. But all of us, even, and survey statistics point to this, even those who actively argue against and fight against a belief in God, admit on the surveys overwhelmingly that they believe that there's something more, that there's a deeper meaning, there's a longing for purpose, for meaning, for understanding. So right off the top, and we're talking philosophically here, the only thing that will satisfy that longing is eternal. You were designed to be satisfied by knowing God. So when we go back to the first chapter, like we talked about last week, if we're going to get to know who God is, let's start at the beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God. God is huge. But in Genesis 1:26, it says, let us make man in our image. We were made by God to be with God.
Can I stop you for a second and ask you what part of God my longing for the Vikings to not be terrible is pointing towards?
Yeah. There is... I don't know. That might be a twisted, messed up thing.
Some of those are even for me. I've followed God my whole life. I became a Christian when I was 4. So this, some of these concepts aren't new to me. But even for me, sometimes it's hard to accept or comprehend or whatever that the fact that I'm physically hungry is pointing to something missing in me spiritually, or the fact that I'm competitive, right? So I played sports my whole life, and now I coach sports, and I want to win. And even I'm competitive. If you and I sit down and play cards, I'm competitive. I want to win. Like to accept that all of those things are pointing me to God. Sometimes that's hard for me to grasp.
Well, and part of it is drill down in that emotion. What will you get if that happens?
To rub it in the Packer fans' faces that the Vikings finally won. That's what.
So when you have a sense of victory, what's the feeling? What's the emotion? Remember, God created emotions. What's the emotion that you get?
Well, as a Vikings fan, I wouldn't know, but in my own sporting career, joy, a feeling of accomplishment,
success.
Yeah, success,
recognition.
Some people, that's hasn't been a huge one for me, but the success side of it for sure.
And what is
small
that?
College athletics, you don't get a ton of recognition, so I haven't really experienced
that. And ultimately, what is that? And this isn't psychoanalysis necessarily. This is just, I think, recognizing what we're drilling down on.
Yeah,
is that
it seems like psychoanalysis?
Affirmation, value.
Sure.
And ultimately, we're wanting: am I valued? Am I good? That's that sense of I'm designed to be holy. I'm designed to be good. And therefore, and that's just not, we aren't just talking in the sense of moral purity. It's I'm designed to be good at something.
Yeah.
And so there's this desire in us. And Scripture points to the fact that our soul is satisfied by God. A couple of Psalms that are kind of next to our neighbors in the book of Psalms. Psalm 62 says, my soul only finds rest in God. Psalm 63 says, my soul is constantly thirsty for him. It's interesting how many times, especially in the Old Testament, we have this imagery of hungering and thirsting because it's something we can understand.
Yeah.
You eat, and then a few hours later, you're hungry again. It's like, oh, I need I need constantly more of this to satisfy me. Jesus said in Matthew 22, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. Why? Because you were made to do that. And here's the deal. We try to come up with explanations for these desires in us. And, it comes up with things like discontentment. The old U2 song, I still haven't found, I'm not going to sing it, what I'm looking for. I started singing it, I thought that was probably not a good idea. But discontentment, what do? If I'm wanting something and not getting satisfaction, we start doing what? We start looking around saying, something's wrong with this relationship. Something's wrong with my job. Something's wrong with this. And the truth is, we live in a sin-infected world. There is something wrong with it.
Yeah.
But we conclude that I just need my world to get better. Or we'll blame ourselves. I need me to get better. Maybe if I got better, or if these things hadn't happened to me, or whatever. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're coming up with other reasons to find the answer to what we need, and that's a relationship with God. We need the God who is infinite to satisfy our eternal souls.
You could have named this series Infinite and Intimate and Intimidating. I think you could have thrown that. It seems so big. Yeah. It seems, and we talked about that last week, that God is so big. Yeah. And but it's even just as we sit here and talk, it's like, man, I feel not pressure necessarily, but the importance of knowing who God is, and then the importance of getting to know him and getting to know who he really is, not like one of the things you talked about last week, not who I want him to be. Yeah. And so I'm going to grab this verse here, and I'm going to grab this story here, and then I can turn God into who I want him to be, but who he really is. It just seems so important and so big.
And we all tend to drift towards the things about God that we like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm actually writing a lesson for our Christmas series right now, for our Christmas at the Movie series, which is going to be a fun series.
It is.
So if you're listening to this before that here in 2021, but one of the sentences that I wrote down even before coming in here is, and see if I can get this right. Often we are broadsided by lessons that we need to learn but would prefer to avoid. And that's true about who God is there's things we go, I like that. Oh, I'm not sure I like that. But I think, talking about the bigness of God, there's a doctrinal concept, and I always get this word wrong. I'm not a deep academic theologian on these things, but it's the word, I believe it's pronounced aseity, A-S-E-I-T-Y, aseity. Basically, it's talking about the completeness of God. God is complete in and of himself. And the reason that's important, and the reason I think this is so cool and for us to understand, is God doesn't need anything. And there's this idea that God created us because he needed us. I mean, for us, why else would we create someone else? Because we were lonely, because we need someone, because we have a need to be loved. And, and people will even look at some of the things the Bible say, and we were created to be with God. Well, does God's ego need to be satisfied? He didn't need anything. He wasn't lonely. He wasn't in need. He wasn't discontented. His nature, and 1 John tells us this, God is love. God is love. He did not need to share his love, but the nature of love, which is the nature of God, is that love is not withheld, it's shared. And so it wasn't a need of God, it's just the nature of who he is. I want to create you so that you can share it with me. And I think that goes back to, the bigness, the hugeness, the overwhelmingness of God. But the thing at the core, somewhere at the core of all this, is the recognition that God wants us to know him. And he's inviting us to spend all of eternity getting to know him, and it's going to be amazing. He doesn't need us to. He wants us to, and he invites us to. And And he's going to do everything he can to help us do that in the best way.
Sure.
No, we may want to say, we want to do it this way. And he'll say, no, I want you to do it
I never
in
do
the
that.
best way.
I never do that.
You know?
I have a question that might be off topic and might not be solvable today. But so God didn't need us. He wasn't lonely. He wasn't discontent. But his nature is love, and so he created us for that purpose, right? So we're all on board there. God also didn't start, right? He's infinite. He just always has existed. So therefore, before he created humans, there's an infinite amount of time that existed. Why did he wait so long to create us?
Well, because you're thinking in terms of time.
I am.
Yeah.
But this is why your brain hurts when you start to think about who God really is.
Yeah, because he is infinite. So he's the eternal now.
Mm-hmm. That's a confusing sentence.
Yeah. In his mind, the best we can understand it, and this goes back to some of what we talked about last week, there are some things that are, at this point in time at least, we've got to take by faith.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we won't learn to grow them as we get to know them, as we grow in our knowledge of him. But there's some things like, I don't get that because I only know time.
Yep.
So did he wait long? Not from his standard.
Right, yeah.
Because there's no time in the sense that we know, and yet he created time. So he understands time because it was from him. So we're going to start
now I know everything.
We're going to start talking real circular here.
Yeah.
You know, so let's go back to our we started out saying, how do I get to know God? And I went off on some of these things. There's three things, and this is true of the Christian faith. And I've been talking a lot about this lately in different settings. And a friend of mine really spurred this thinking in me. It's not new thinking from him or from me, but there's three things about the Christian faith, and we tend to focus in on one of these. There's things we need to know, who we are designed to be, and things that we are commanded or asked or invited to do. And we tend to go, what do I want to know? And if all we focus in on is knowledge, we're going to limit things, because there are some things we grow in by, I need to understand who I'm made to be. Okay, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. And I won't understand the things I need to know and who I need to be unless there are some things I need to do. For example, I mean, we can put this in motion with some other things. I can read and study all I want about, and you knew a basketball illustration was coming because I always use it with you in the room. You know, I can read all the books about playing basketball, and I know that I can say I'm supposed to be a basketball player, and so I put on the jersey and I put on all of that. But unless I actually get out on the court and practice, and in your case, because you've tried to teach me, you'd probably say, that's not who you're called to be. That's something we need to know. You aren't called to be, so you don't even need to do it. But for us, we get to know God by doing the three things: growing in knowledge, living out who he designed us to be, and doing the things that are the way he designed life to be lived. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So this may go back to, you always ask me at the end for homework, and I'm going to jump ahead for this. Ooh. So this is the big thing. I want us to think about this week. How are you growing in, what have you learned about who God is? What do you need to know? What does the Bible say about who God is? What does it say about who he is? We've referred to Genesis 1:26. It says, let us make mankind in our image. Wait a minute. I thought God was one. In fact, later on, we find in the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy, it says, hear, O Israel, God is one God. And yet the very first chapter, it says, let us make mankind in our image. There's something there we need to know, and it's called the Trinity. That's
and
not
it's
something
not
we're going to talk
confusing
about
at all,
this
so
week.
we'll just move right.
Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, not three gods, because the Bible is clear he's one God, but he's three persons.
Is that who God has always been, or is that how he chose to manifest himself to us?
As far as it's revealed to us in the Bible, that's who he is. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's always been in perfect relationship within himself. That goes back to what we just were talking about. This is who he is. Has he manifested? I mean, did he show himself that way new to us? God is unchanging in and of, so it's not new.
Yep.
Maybe new to us. So what do you need to know? Something like that. Or maybe you study the names of God in the Bible.
There's a lot of them.
Which people ask the question. I'm normally the one you're asking the questions of. But why would the Bible give us like a million names for God?
Because nicknames are fun.
Exactly.
I think that's what
Well, but I think you just hit on it. Because, you've named your kids, here's their name.
Yep.
But there are other things words you use to describe them, depending on how they behave that day.
Exhausting.
Hey, careful. But so maybe pick up the Bible app and do a reading, and we talked about it last week, a study on the names of God and why that is. So learn who he is, and then begin to ask the question, because this is who he is, who am I supposed to be? It means I was handcrafted by him for a purpose.
Yeah.
So what are the implications of the fact that he is my shepherd? He cares for me. That's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then pay attention to things that you have come to believe about yourself. There's a teaching for another time. There are things that we say about ourselves that aren't true, but we've made agreements with ourselves. In other words, I can say something like, and I'll use a small one, I can say something like, I'm really tired tonight. Or I could say, I'm just a real exhausting person. But we say that, I'm feeling insecure today, or I'm an insecure person. You hear the difference?
Mm-hmm.
Who has God called you to be? You may feel a certain way, but God did not design you to be insecure. And so pay attention to who he's designed you to be. And then how do we get to know people? We get to know people by doing things with them. So one of the best ways to get to know God is to actually do the stuff that he told us we should do. We talk about, around New Hope, we talk about the big three things with us as a church. Everyone should be in a gathering. Everyone should be in a group. Everyone should be using their spiritual gifts and serving. So are you doing those three things? If I'm serving, am I serving? Am I paying attention to what I'm discovering about who God is as I interact with other people? Because you were made in the image of God. So as I get to know you, I'm learning things about who God is and how he made you. He's creative. He's also
pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that he made someone like you means that he's got a lot of grace.
Yeah. And mercy. Brings up more questions about God is really what it does.
Yeah.
That's great. I want to add something. Okay. I mean, it is related, but it's just a interesting topic. So I'm going to add it to our homework at the end.
You're giving us homework.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give two homeworks, but one of them is from yours. So, your homework again. Give it to all of us as a reminder.
I would say find a Bible reading plan that helps you grow in your knowledge of who God is, and pay attention to the implications of who he's designed you to be, and then make sure you're doing something with that. Don't just grow your information up here. Mm-hmm. What are you doing with it?
Okay. So that's your first homework assignment.
Okay.
Second homework assignment is from Pastor Mike last week and this week. Email in some questions, pastor.mike@newhopewilson.com. Email some questions for me to throw at Pastor Mike.
Throw them at me. I'm not sure I like that image.
Yeah, and I'm going to write them on cards and hurl them across the table here. And then the third one, it's just because I wanted to ask you.
3 pieces of homework.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, so I figured I might as well.
Okay.
You guys can email us the same thing, either pastor.mike@newhopewilson.com or david@newhopewilson.com. David's spelled with an E, by the way.
Yeah.
Last week I said you could email me, and I just said my name, but it's DAVED.
There you go.
At New Hope. So you might have sent some random emails out into the ether that I will never read. But what's your favorite name for God?
My favorite name for God actually comes out of an old song. This is where I first learned it, written by Martin Luther. It's "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." Mm-hmm. There's a phrase in there that on the later on in it, this calls him Lord Sabaoth. And as a kid, I was like, "What?"
Sounds like a Lord of the Rings character.
And I had to look it up, and it actually comes out of Jehovah Sabaoth. I am. This is Jehovah Sabaoth, Lord of the armies of the hosts and the hosts of heaven.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And so it's one when I'm needing protection and power. It reminds me that I actually have access to the one who commands all of the angels, and their job is to guard me and protect me and come alongside of me. And so that's one of my favorite.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I like that one. What's yours?
I think Jireh is my favorite. There's also a song
which means
provider. And I think that's been my favorite for a while. But there's a song that's come out more recently called Jireh by Maverick City Music, which is one of my favorite songs. And so that's probably vaulted it into for sure my favorite. But there's a lot of good ones. I really truly would love to hear what your favorite is. So that's David, Daved at newhopewilson.com or pastor.mike at newhopewilson.com, and we'd love to hear from you. But thank you again for joining us on the Grow podcast. I always have so much fun. I think today I was really tired, and I think Pastor Mike was a little tired too, but he just naturally has more energy than me. But
I don't know about that.
Once we get started with these, I just always have a blast. And so I really appreciate getting to sit here with you, Pastor Mike, and I know all of you are really appreciating it as well. So join us again next week. Remember, growth always starts with a next step. So let's make, you could pick one of the 3 homeworks we gave, or you could do all 3.
There you go.
But either way, make sure you're taking a next step this week, continuing to grow in your relationship with God. And thank you again for being here. Hopefully we'll see you next time.